So you're mixing a track and you're spending hours, maybe even days trying to EQ it perfectly to get that perfect mix that you're looking for, but in the end, it just sounds worse than it did before. A lot of people boost or cut frequencies without really knowing what they're listening for, and that's exactly why their mixes end up, harsher, thinner, or just completely unbalanced. In this video, I'll show you how to use an EQ with all the proper steps, with the clear reason behind every move. That way you can shape your sounds properly, fix the right problems, and stop making EQ decisions that hurt the mix overall in the end. So before we dive right on in, we need to know what is an EQ. So an EQ is an equalizer. And what it does is it allows you to pretty much sculpt what you are hearing within the sound that you have the plugin put on. So think of it this way. The range of sound that you see with this graph here, it goes from low frequencies towards the left side, and as you move on to the right, it's higher and higher frequencies, all the way till you get to the top of the spectrum. So low frequencies are bass, a lot of drums, low harmonies, things like that. Usually the bass is down there. The high frequencies, these would be bells, whistles, high-pitched voices, vocals, things like that. And so you can just imagine it being a whole range of area, and everything within this range is what you're hearing on your song. So everything needs its space. So we use equalizers to carve out or boost any certain areas that need to fill that space up. What we do with these is we have these different shapes right here. All of these are different shapes. And to show you the shapes, I'm actually going to pull up one of my favorite equalizers here, the FabFilter Pro Q2. So right here, we have a low cut. And what this is, a low cut is also known as a high pass filter. That's what most people call it, but you can call it a low cut if you want, because it lets the high frequencies pass and it cuts the lows. So let's see it in action. As we cut more of the lower frequencies, you'll hear them disappear. Cool. And so now, similar to that, we have high cut. And it does the exact same thing, but just with the opposite frequencies. So this will cut the high frequencies and leave or let pass the low frequencies. So it'll be like this. Sweet. Okay, so now the other most commonly used frequency curve would be bell curves. And what this is essentially, this is what the most people will be using when cutting or boosting their frequencies in an equalizer. So this just lets you kind of pinpoint exactly what part of this frequency spectrum that you want to boost or cut. So let's say I didn't like this frequency here. See how that sounds really harsh? So what I would do is I would pinpoint where it is that I want to cut, and then I just bring it down. And that will help me pinpoint a desired location that I really want to cut or boost. And then another parameter within EQs is the Q. And so what this is the range of your frequency band. So the higher the Q, the more narrow that your frequency band will be. And this is for if you really want to pinpoint, maybe there's like one little frequency that's too loud in the mix and you want to cut that. You can pinpoint it and cut it using a very high Q. But if you lower that Q, the lower it is, the more broad, the more range your frequency curve has. So you can make them really huge. Typically you wouldn't want to do this, but you can make them really big or really small. And so you make a bigger or a smaller Q or wider range if you wanted to affect more frequencies. You see the difference? And so those are the three basic parameters for any typical EQ. You've got your frequency that you want to affect. You've got your gain, how much you boost or cut that frequency. And then you've got your Q, how wide of a range is that affected portion going to be? And with this knowledge, you can pretty much work your way around pretty much any EQ out there these days. They're all generally the same. So now that we know what an EQ is and how it works and the main functions of how to utilize them, now we want to know, why do we need them and when do we use them? So we need them in order to carve up that real estate that I mentioned before. Every item in your track, every instrument, even the vocals, because vocals are instruments too, every item needs its space. You can't have too many elements in one area or else it'll end up cluttered. And if you have nothing in one area, it might sound like it's missing something. So you'll want to fill up that space. You want things to be nice and evenly balanced across the entire frequency spectrum, everything that you can hear. And so an example of when to use it would be this. So I have my pad right here, but what if we have that pad playing along with a bass line right here? Okay, sounds pretty good, but what we can do is we can free up a little bit more space to let that bass actually pump through a little bit more. So there's currently some frequencies going on in the pad right here, and I have this EQ open for the pad. There's currently some frequencies that are kind of touching those low ends down here. So what I would want to do is I'd want to take a low cut and make it a little sharper. And then I'll cut out some of those low ends. So now we have less bass coming out of the pads that would clutter up and clash with the actual bass track that we have here. So let's take a look at what's going on in this bass track. So yeah, check this out. This bass track is taking up all of this space around here. And if you remember in the pad, we cut all the way up into about 442 hertz. Okay, so we made the cut around here. And before we made that cut, that pad was taking up all of the space for that bass line, all from here on down. And so when we cut that, we actually gave the bass a little bit more real estate, more space, so it can be heard and wouldn't clash with our pad. So now we have this. Okay, so that sounds a lot cleaner than it did before. So now, what if we added another instrument? What if we add a pluck into it? Okay, that sounds pretty cool. But let's see. Let's take a look at the frequencies in that pluck sound. And let's see if there's anything taking up too much space, maybe taking up too much of the low frequencies. Let's see. Yeah, take a look at that. All of this. There's so much going on in the low end. So let's go ahead and add a low cut to this. So that sounds much better. There's way less clashing with the bass line. and we still can fully hear that pluck. It doesn't sound like it's drowned out or anything like that. It still sounds nice and full, but it's not taking up all of that low frequency space. Great. So now let's see what it sounds like before EQ. Okay. Now let's see what it sounds after EQ. A lot less clutter, a lot less clutter. And that's a good example of, you don't need to do too much. You don't need to do too much. You don't want to find yourself having an EQ that looks like this. Like you don't need all of this. If you have to do all of this for your EQ, then you probably just need to use different sounds initially. That's one of the first things you want to do. You want to use sounds that sound well together. You know, you might have to go through some presets. You might have to tweak a few things here and there before you even get to the mixing. You want things to sound generally good before you go in and start trying to carve through your mix with a bunch of EQs and things like that. You don't want to have to make it sound good with EQ. EQ just gives everything its space and makes it sound better and polished and balanced. So that's a major part of it. Just a little side tip. You want to get the proper pieces to the puzzle before you start trying to put the puzzle together with a bunch of pieces that just simply don't work. So sound selection is a big key in all of this. So now I want to give a little bit of a live example of how I would use EQ in a track that I produced. So I've got a track loaded up here, and it's not going to need too much, but there are a few little tweaks that I'm going to want to make to it just to get that mix perfect with the right balance and have enough space for everything that I want to be heard. So let's go ahead and listen to it first. Here we have a lot of bass on that synth. We're going to cut that out. And right here is mostly just drums and bass. Put emphasis on that bass. Here's the keys. Way too much bass on the keys.
Listen to me closely this time, I won't let this go. You're the reason I'm confused, no, I will lose control. Oh, if you'd open up your eyes and let me know. I think we could be something so good. I'm not gonna let you walk away. I'm not gonna let you walk away.
Now there's space. Cutting out that bass out of the keys, it allows space for the bass lines to actually shine. Cool. So yeah, I mean, that sounded pretty good. It didn't need too much. Mainly all I had to do on that track was just cut out some of those low frequencies that were on like the synth and the keys and things like that. And doing that gave the bass more room to shine. In that track, I really wanted to put emphasis on the bass line and have it really pumping when it's played through some loudspeakers or whatever. So cutting out those frequencies out of the other sounds that were not meant to be bass gives the bass line room to shine. And that's generally what you want to do with EQ in most instances. Sometimes you might want to boost some frequencies a little bit here and there and things like that. But generally, you want to cut what you don't want from other instruments that are taking up space that your instrument should be sitting in. And you don't want things to clash. That's what makes things muddy. That's what we call muddy. And in clashing and harshness. You don't want that. You don't want that. And so, yeah, that's a general idea of how to use EQ. And with these tips, it should help you a whole lot. And, hopefully you can use these to make something good and, make that true sound that you've been looking for instead of spending countless hours just tweaking things and hoping to, hit gold. So, yeah, hopefully that helped you out. And if you have any other ideas of tutorials that you want me to touch upon, maybe if I missed something that you're curious about, anything at all, leave it down in the comments and I'll be sure to get to it. So with that being said, y'all have a blessed one. Peace.